Another day, another episode. I'm not gonna bore you to death, so let's jump straight in. Redcat 2, as the number may give it away, is a second game in the series and a very fun, unique action platformer from Netherlands. Princess Dana, yes, Dana not Diana, has been kidnapped by a group of vengeful mice led by an evil wizard, and it's up to our ginger cooking pot wearing protagonist to save her. This will require you traverse through 8 rather large levels, defeating hundreds of mice and eventually facing the evil wizard himself. Redcat can use various weapons that he'll find and pick up, and will also collect useful items and treasures while adventuring on his way to save the princess. The screen can fill up with mice at times, and while it's a neat effect seeing so many of them animated at once, it gets a little annoying gameplay-wise. The characters' sprites animations, especially our Redcats, are really well done and super smooth, having very cartoony-like quality to them. They're a pleasure to witness while playing. Same, however, cannot be said about the backgrounds, which in comparison look bland, boring and rather simplistic. Sure, there are some parallax effects here and there, but they're unimpressive nonetheless. Redcat 2 is entirely in its original language, which means that most of us won't know what it's saying whenever it does. But it's so rare that it's largely irrelevant, and even more so because it's a platformer, which are usually more well known for the journey rather than the destination, so to speak. Other than the presentation, there's not much in Redcat 2 that would elevate it over any other platformers of the type. So it's not a bad game, but I wouldn't go out of my way to seek it out if you don't have it already. Rusty is what I am. Every morning when I barely crawl out of my bed and struggle for a few minutes to grasp where and who I am and what's ahead of me throughout the day. It's also a name of the fork that Joey Tribbiani from Friends had, and totally not coincidentally what I called my favorite fork inspired by him 15 or so years ago too. He was a close friend of mine, as any other would be. The fork, that is. It was appropriately sturdy, didn't bend regardless of the force I used, provided it was within everyday use limits. It wasn't too big, so could be used for both meals and desserts. It was the best. Sadly, he's not with us anymore. As 6 or 7 years ago he disappeared without a trace. And yes, he and not it. And he'll be missed. Anyway, most importantly, in the context of today's video at least, Rusty is a side-view horror-themed action platformer conceptually very similar to much more well-known Castlevania series of games. Many years ago, Monte Carlo, not the city but the ruler of Transylvania, was sealed away by the seal of a sacrificed soul. As centuries have passed, however, the seal weakened, and now monsters started appearing, and roamed the land uncontrollably, spreading chaos and death everywhere, and worst of all, kidnapping young women from villages around the area. Nobody knows why. There is a legend, however, a folk tale, if you will, of one that will come from afar and save the land when in direst of needs of saving. And that one is you. Well, not you per se, but Rusty, a young beautiful girl who appeared seemingly out of nowhere in one of the villages seeking the source of the monsters. And you take control of her and you will succeed. So you, playing as Rusty, grab your whip that's trusty and head into cursed land of Transylvania to kill monsters in a crazy mania. Okay. Not only it makes no sense, but is also rather cringe. It is factually correct though, so you'll be searching for the kidnapped girls, fighting various different evil creatures and monsters, and searching for keys to unlock the doors to progress. You know, things you'd do in your run-of-the-mill Castlevania game. But you can also run and swing from hooks like Indiana Jones would. As you go through the game, you'll unlock special attacks and an old companion that will help you in combat. Overall, the Castlevania influences are present all throughout the Rusty, and good, because it's actually surprisingly fun and well put together title, which may make you wonder why wasn't it more popular given the quality. Sadly, the reason is quite simple. It only released in Japan and in Japanese. And while you may not need to understand occasional text prompt or story snippet, even running it on our Western machines without crashing requires a special DOS extender. So yeah, perhaps here's the first and last time you'll see the game. Scorcher is an unusual futuristic racer, similar to Wipeout or Mega Race, so very fast, imaginative, bendy and fun-looking tracks. There's no story to the game, and while it may not be necessary in a racer, it would be good to at least know a background, a genesis of the races. But whatever, it is what it is. There are 6 different tracks and you have a turbo boost and jump to navigate them, which sometimes is not as easy as it seems initially, because there's a little monkey ball in the game too. Namely, your bolide, craft or whatever you wanna call it, seems to be floating within the sphere-like cage that rolls on the tracks. So said jumping and turbo may be useful not only to overtake opponents, but also to stay within the confines of the course. All that said, Scorcher offers no level editor, no weapons or imaginative power-ups, and nothing that would keep you playing for prolonged periods of time. So, the fun lasts for as long as it takes you to familiarize yourself with the 6 tracks that you race on. And it's not that long, I'm afraid. If I'm to be honest, to me at least, Scorcher feels more like a tech demo that should be added to a new 3D accelerator card purchase to show off its rendering capabilities rather than the full game. Anyway, since we're on the subject of presentation, while it's pretty decent for an early 3D, I am definitely not a fan of the draw distance, which is just a joke. You literally see maybe like, I don't know, 3-4 city buses in length ahead of you, 3 blue well stops, and the rest is just black cavity of nothingness. Why do I measure distance in buses and whales, you may wonder? Well, everyone knows more or less how long is either, and doing math between meters and feet seem like a chore that I'm definitely not gonna attempt it in my head. So yeah, Scorcher is fun, but it's also short and doesn't offer any additional content. So do what you please with that knowledge. Play it or don't, your call. Evil northern armies have destroyed peaceful lands of Naipusan, and you, playing as the ninja hailing from the region, have to defeat their vile leader, the Shogun of Death. I know, epic. Shovel Knight is an always scrolling action platformer in which you go through differently themed stages, from village through cemetery all the way to the castle, and defeat various different enemies until you get to the final, aforementioned wicked boss. You're armed with a sword, or katana I should say really, and you also have some limited magical powers, so you can spawn projectile shots out of thin air like a true Sunday magician, and heal yourself too. It all costs magical energy though, so you will have to refill it. And it's done by either collecting gold spheres scattered seemingly everywhere, or completing levels. Believe it or not, but Shadow Knights was made by ID Software, the very same that's responsible for Doom. And while it's obvious from the get-go that it's very simplistic compared to their famous classic, some of their design style and craft can be noticed all throughout Shadow Knights. The action is fast and frantic at times, and the enemies come at you in groups, if possible, obviously. The graphics for EGA, even if the sprites are rather small, are quite good and charming. And some later stages also have very bloody backgrounds, with gore and decomposed body parts coloring them in deep reds. Another of ID staples. Overall, Shadow Knights is a pretty cool little action game, and if you like those, it's definitely one not to miss. The evil King Dorf has kidnapped the princess and sent his overwhelming force of mechanical hoppers to attack the Golden City. I know, most of these names are quite silly, but it's a video game. As usual, in grim, difficult situations like this one, it's a toss between the two. Either you, so intergalactic superhero extraordinaire and universally acclaimed lover, or Manbat. Apparently something happened in Gotham and he has to deal with it. I'm Batman. Oh, okay, I'll let them know. He says it's in Metropolis and not Gotham. Whatever. Thing is, you gotta save the Golden City, the very city where golden showers were invented, a BDSM mecca, so to speak. You play as Mr. Potato Head but younger and have to save the princess and the kingdom, all at once. And there are 3 ways you can do just that. By building defensive bases that will keep hoppers at bay, by fighting with them directly, or by going after the King Dorf himself. Whichever path you choose, it always ends up with a conflict with the evil king and you defeating him. Because you can't lose if you're the protagonist, right? All the aforementioned will run various interactive minigames which are very varied and will test your agility. And while there's quite a few of different ones, they can all really be assigned to one of the 2 kinds. Either a shoot 'em up or, well, dodge 'em up. So you will either kill or avoid getting killed yourself. Controls are a bit flunky and take time getting used to them. But when you do, it's actually pretty playable, even if really odd title. Also, who doesn't want to play as Humpty Dumpty or Mr. Potato Head wannabe? In the last episode we tackled Pickle Wars, so it's high time that we talk about space vegetables. Eat your greens, kids, they're good for you. Maybe you'll learn to appreciate them more after hearing about this title. So, Space Vegetables is a simple side-scrolling shooter mixed with elements from Missile Command out of all things, namely defense of the domes, as everything else is much different. These are however not huge domes housing millions of citizens, but rather tiny itty-bitty ones used for cultivating veggies in an unfriendly-to-life space environment. So in each stage you have to collect a certain number of vegetables that grow in said domes to reach your daily quota to be able to carry on to the next level. It's not that easy though, as while the domes are state-of-the-art technology and can easily spawn flora without any supervision or external input, aliens that populate the area, for whatever the reason, are all out to steal them. Naturally, as you would have done with any other pest on Earth, these aliens have to be eradicated, and you have a laser and jetpack to do so. More laser than jetpack, but you know, jetpack's useful too. Some of the aliens, when killed, release small pockets of oxygen and they can be collected to refill your spacesuit's reserves. Vegetables grow inside domes in cycles, and when they're fully grown and ready for collection, you have to pick them up to allow another one to grow in their place. When a daily quota is reached, the next day/stage begins. Rinse and repeat until you've collected enough to be moved to another moon. And there's 3 of them: Phobos, Deimos and Riskos, and they serve as worlds in the game. If at any point all domes are destroyed or your oxygen reserves are depleted, the game ends. So, now, as you know how difficult and time-consuming it actually is to prepare all those veggies in the year 2040, perhaps you'll appreciate them more in your diet. Or not, because it's not PBS programming and you can do whatever you please with your life. Speed Haste is one of those games that's incredibly fun and frustratingly terrible in the same time. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Firstly, and most of all, it's an arcade 3D racer. It features 2 different kinds of cars, either Formula 1 or NASCAR, and numerous tracks to race on. Funny enough, they're the same for both cars, which is perhaps a bit unrealistic, but Speed Haste is an arcade game, so we gotta excuse it this little oversight. That said, you can pick between the manual and automatic gears for that tiny touch of realism. But if I'm to be honest, given how floaty and slidey the controls are, I'd suggest sticking to automatic and focusing entirely on driving. There's no damage model in the game, and the AI is beyond stupid. That's what I meant by Speed Haste being terrible. The CPU drivers are all driving along their invisible line that they're supposed to race over, and they don't mind at all if there's anything in their way, which more often than not results in them straight up ramming into you just because you're driving over what they assume is their path. It's stupid, it's bad game design, and it makes Speed Haste incredibly easy when played against CPU. All that said, when you enjoy it with a friend in split screen, or even better 3 of them over IPX connection, Speed Haste becomes hella fun. Its fast, furious arcade gameplay works like a charm against others. In multiplayer, you don't mind the floatiness as much cause everyone's victim to it, so Speed Haste ends up being a lot of fun. If you plan to check it out, only do it if you have someone to play it with. Speed Haste's sound design is okay, but nothing to write home about. Graphics, on the other hand, are pretty good for 1995 on PC, and remind me a little of Virtua Racing or Daytona USA. They may not be on the exact level of the latter, but they're decent nonetheless. To summarize, Speed Haste is good in multiplayer and not as much against CPU. Period. Spirit of Excalibur is the second Synergistic Software's game after excellent War in the Middle-earth, and it uses the very same engine to tell the tale of Camelot after King Arthur's death. Unlike the first title, however, Spirit of Excalibur is divided into 5 chapters, each of being a small semi-contained campaign. In first, you, as a regent, are traveling to Camelot to claim the throne of England after King's untimely departure. In second, you must protect your lands from invading forces and try to re-establish Order of the Knights of the Round Table. In third, after eventually bringing peace to the land, you must face the giant warrior who appeared seemingly out of nowhere and is causing trouble. Fourth takes place 2 years later, and you must discover the meaning of your supporters' disappearances and find the source of the emerging evil forces. And finally, in last, fifth, you'll face your arch-nemesis, Morgan Le Fay. In each of these chapters you'll be traveling around the overworld map and interacting with various characters, be it knights, nobles or commoners, doing everything in your power to complete your objectives. All this happens on the so-called scene view screens, which are close-up side views and will always display all characters taking part in conversation or interaction, whatever it may be. Outside of your main objectives, you'll tackle various situations which could be considered a day-to-day kingdom management. Simplified, no doubt about that, but management nonetheless. While Spirit of Excalibur is definitely an interesting, unusual game, it failed to live up to the expectations that the gamers had after War in the Middle-earth, and never gained any noteworthy following or recognition. Stack Up is a real-time puzzle game, and as with all games in the falling blocks genre, your aim is simple: to amass as many points as possible by clearing the screen in the most efficient way. The game board is a grid of 6 by 18 squares, and you must arrange 3 colored groups of blocks falling downwards so that they would form lines of at least 3 of the same color horizontally, diagonally or vertically. I realized that I've been calling them blocks or bricks, when in fact in Stack Up they're different, rather colorful objects, but it's just my being used to games in the genre usually being a bit simpler than this one presentation-wise. And I know that you know what I mean, right? Don't answer, I won't hear anyway. Anyway, each individual object that's a part of the falling trio always drops as far as possible, so if there's a space underneath, parts of the group may end up at different heights. It's also a part of the puzzling strategy of Stack Up, to stack them up in the way that would then later on allow you to quickly clear the screen. So placing them seemingly without clearing anything at first does not mean that you're making mistakes. It may be a part of your grand strategy. And knowing you, my dear viewer, you'll have high scores left and right if you start playing. And not only because you'll be competing on your own PC offline against yourself only, but also because you're incredibly smart. I mean, if you weren't, you wouldn't be watching these videos of mine. Each level requires you to form a set number of lines, and when you do so, you progress to the next. After that, it's pretty much rinse and repeat until you fail. Diagonal lines are worth most points, then there are verticals, and horizontal ones are worth the least. While Stack Up is perhaps nothing to write home about, not shining in any of its aspects, gameplay, sound or graphics, it's a pretty fun overall package and a definite treat for fans of the falling brick puzzlers. Okay, if judging by the title and the first few seconds of the on-screen action, if I can call it that even, you assume that Star General is Panzer General but in space, then you're right, because it's precisely what it is. After covering various theaters, conflicts and even dabbling into the fantasy, SSI launched into space with this unusual for the series outing. And while it's a fine and fun game if you like top-down turn-based strategies that is, it was not a huge success I think they hoped for. It never gained as huge following and fanbase as the other games did, and never sold as many copies. I mean, over the years it paid for itself, so was not a flop per se, but was far off the popularity and sales results more popular games in the series experienced. Which is odd, as it's a really decent title but perhaps not one fans of previous outings were eagerly waiting for. Star General features a whole slew of scenarios which can vary from small combat encounters to all-out wars, and also a random map mode which is there to extend the life of the title. A life that was sadly cut short by the lack of any real interest in the game. There's 7 spacefaring races to pick between, humans obviously among them, twofold I might add, and they all fight for control of a local star cluster, conquering planets and star systems. Each race has a special unit, be it ground or space, and these can make or break the game, depending how well you and CPU use them. All ships have missile and beam values, which correspond to their combat strength and is used in resolving encounters. Land units use soft and hard assault values for that. Overall, between all races, there are 90 different types of units, and many of them have specializations like troop transport, mine countermeasure vessels, reconnaissance, and a bunch of various destroyers, battleships and such. There are also buildings which can be erected on planets like space docks, mines, factories and biodomes to name a few, and they all support your expansion and conquest. Research, while present, is rather limited. That said, even if it's basic, it cannot be overlooked, so keep that in mind. While never having reached popularity of other titles in the series, Star General is a fun, challenging strategy that will no doubt keep fans of the genre entertained all throughout. Another one done? I know, crazy. But truth be told, I worked on 2 videos at the same time and only split the recording and editing, so they were bound to come one after another. How do you like the games though? Any of them something you'd like to try? Let me know in the comments below. If you liked the video, hit those like and subscribe buttons below. If you didn't, well then there's thumbs down there too. But I suppose you wouldn't have persevered up to this point if you really didn't. Around 60% of you are not subscribed, and there's currently no way of knowing if YouTube will decide to recommend you the next episode or not, other than subscribing and hitting that bell, that is. And when you hit that bell, whenever the new video is out, YouTube will actually send you a small and friendly notification about it, so you wouldn't miss it. If you'd like to support the channel, Patreon and YouTube memberships are a great way of doing so. They will help me release better content, and also they get first dibs on all new videos before they're publicly accessible on YouTube. If you can't or don't want to do that though, likes and subscribes are great too. I would like to take a moment here and thank all the YouTube creators from whose videos short bits were taken to serve as a background to my commentary. They're amazing and stars among the retro community. You will find names of their channels at the top of the screen when their footage is running, and also in the video description below. For me though, this is all, so have a good one and I'll see you next time. Peace.